You threw me off, Steph. Okay, let's get right to the format here. Each side will be speaking for 5 minutes each. We're going to lead off with a member from the OTAG. So basically, you're going to have an OTAG speaker for 5 minutes, a councillor for 5 minutes. We're going to follow that up with the second OTAG speaker, then the second councillor. At the end of each of them speaking, they will, amongst each other, have 2 minutes aside for rebuttal. Whichever councillor wants to do the rebuttal, or they can do it together, but it's restricted to 2 minutes. Okay, does everybody understand that on both sides? And agree? At the end of that, we're going to let you, the public, which is why we're really here, up to the podium. Please, you'll go up one at a time. You can line up, of course. State your name. If you won't have an affiliation you'd like to let us know about, feel free to do that. Ask your question. You will have 1 minute to ask your question. So make it succinct and to the point. Each side will have 2 minutes to debate that at the end of it. Okay? This is something that all parties have agreed to, and we hope it's a format that works well for everybody. And now, ladies and gentlemen, if you'll make sure your cell phone's off, put your seats in the uptight position. We're going to begin the debate, and as we said earlier, our first speaker does come from the Ottawa Taxpayers Advocacy Group side, and Bill, I think, will be the first speaker.
Yes, my name is Bill O'Malley. Ottawa is a good city and its residents are great, but as more and more residents are realizing the city is not living up to its potential, amalgamation recommended by a previous city administration was to make the city more efficient in its operation and save the resident taxpayer money. And you know that didn't happen. The taxpayer has and is being taken for granted. Property taxes have increased and additional user fees have added a heavy burden to many resident families. In order to appease the taxpayer, glowing reports have been produced by City Hall describing the progress in the city. The reports didn't really reflect the true picture. The intrusion of City Hall into areas that are not in the sphere of basic city services is rampant. And over time, since amalgamation, the taxpayer is catching on to the methodology of councillors and senior management. The average taxpayer wants more of a say in the way their money is spent. As a result, you now have the formation of the Ottawa Taxpayer Advocacy Group. The party at City Hall is over, and the legal extortion has to stop. There are many areas of city operations that can be improved on, but for this session, we'll focus mainly on the largest expense of the City of Ottawa, and that is the compensation level of its workers. Perhaps it's better stated as the number of employees deemed necessary to run the city, receiving a level of compensation that far exceeds the private sector. The combination of the number of employees and the compensation level is a formula for disaster to the financial soundness of the city. The taxpayer has heard too often from compensation is comparable to other cities, the unknown arbitrators were responsible, there may be a strike if union demands aren't met, the Ontario government forced a level of service in certain cities and that require more staff, etc. Well, this city has to live within its own means. We're not any other city, we can't compare them to that. The buck stops with the Ottawa City Councillors. They authorize the wage levels and they authorize the hiring of employees. On amalgamation day, the City of Ottawa spends 38.1% on its total revenue on employee salary, wages, and benefits. As of December the 31st, 2008, the level of compensation had increased to 52% of total revenue, or $1.2 billion. How and why this was allowed is beyond the comprehension of the majority of taxpayers. Many responsible citizens have warned council that they were going down a path to financial disaster. And this has turned out to be legal extortion. The Ontario Municipal Act bestows the power of ruling individual municipalities to the elected councillors. And they're really not following what they should be doing. And it's all about money. Since the day of amalgamation, 82% of all of the new revenue raised since that day, amalgamation day, has been expensed for employee expenses. If you can imagine, 82% of all of the new revenue has been expensed for employees. You got nothing other than the cost of inflation to cover things like purchases and whatnot that they have to do for other things with infrastructure. and it's really legal extortion. This means that the City of Ottawa is basically stuck in the year 2000 as the remaining balance of new revenue generated since amalgamation has, for the most part, only covered the additional inflationary costs of purchasing necessary materials used in the maintaining the city infrastructure. The average usage of new revenue for new employee expense for the other 8 jurisdictions in Ontario that are similar was 43.59%. Ottawa, based on the financial statements, had a whopping 72.24%. And if you really rub it into what they call a financial information report, it's 81%. The numbers have been confirmed by the city treasurer. Those numbers are mine, developed by myself, and it shocked many councillors. But only few had enough guts to come back to me. Mary Ann Wilkinson was quite good at coming back and not believing the figures. That was good. And that's legal extortion. It has to stop, and these councillors have to start to take their responsibility under the Municipal Act seriously or get out. Thank you.
Shall I give you 40 seconds, Alex? Next, we're going to hear from Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you. I just want to make a statement first because of what was said on CFRA this morning. It was said that I should spend my time helping my residents in Glencairn. So I didn't know Glencairn's not in my ward, for one thing, although I have spent a lot of time helping them because it's in the West End and I do that. But as a councillor, we have to deal with a lot of different issues, and we do that every day, and one of them is taxation. And as I said, I have responded to this group about taxation because it is one of the concerns that I have. I know many people have a great deal of difficulty paying their taxes, and especially people who are retired, and I'm of that age that I know a lot of them. And I do what I can to keep the taxes as low as possible, and I'm one of the few that actually voted against the increase in the last budget because I wanted to see if we could make more savings. And I actually agree we could have a 0% increase, but that would mean that cuts would have to be made, and I'll tell you why in a minute. And that would mean changes to service levels, and likely cuts to a lot of programs, and particularly those that serve people. And that doesn't mean that I won't work to make the city more efficient or save money wherever possible, because I will. But I'm aware of the difficulties in doing that. And even Mayor O'Brien has acknowledged that some increases may be necessary and has in fact voted for increases, because he's recognized after being here and seeing what the situation is that sometimes that is necessary. So I'd like to raise some of the points that you sent in emails to us and raised tonight to say what we have to deal with and why it's so difficult to deal with these things. And was mentioned, we got some information about the Edmonton survey. Well, the interesting thing about comparing Ottawa to cities outside of Ontario is that there's a lot of differences. Ontario is the only municipality, only province, where municipalities have to pay for social programs and public health. And we pay we've been told an average household that adds about $400 to your tax bill. The other 9 provinces pay all of those costs. In some places, like Edmonton and Winnipeg and Toronto, the province has actually given them extra taxing authority so they can raise money on certain things that we don't have the right to do in Ottawa, because we can only do what the acts tell us we can do. So that means we don't have access to those forms of revenue.